so strategic in what they're doing that they're not really thinking about the impact on the communities that they're leaving behind. So I would very much look at federal legislation into that. I also think we ought to look at other ways of delivering health care beyond the ACA. I think the ACA is an imperfect law. There are a lot of compromises that got it into law, and some of which many of us are not happy with. So my immediate thought is we have to stabilize that system right now. There's a bill in the Senate, the Murray-Alexander bill, that attempts to do that by addressing the subsidy issue and then also stabilizing the marketplaces. And then I think we ought to look at a public option. And so a public option is where individuals or organizations can buy insurance from the government. And so that will drive costs down because the government will be able to do it more cost effectively, and then hopefully private insurers it will be driven down as well. So there's a bill in the Senate called the Murphy-Merkley bill. It's one of 6 exploring the public option, but I think that's the route we go to expand care for everybody. The other thing I would say is we have to also look at and call out the Trump administration's consistent attacks on the ACA because they are undermining it. That's why when you lose the individual mandate, healthy people flee the system, because of course they do, young people flee it. When you aren't advertising it to people, because you're cutting those costs, that hurts. I mean, the fact that they won't defend the ACA in court right now to protect people with pre-existing conditions should horrify everybody, because about 1/3 of Americans have it. So we have to recognize that. And then you have to recognize that Jamie Herrera Butler proudly voted to repeal it 40 times with no real replacement. And the Republicans' replacement bill, which was not passed thankfully, was so much worse. So we have to hold our representative to account for her votes because she was trying to dismantle it from the start. So that's a few thoughts.
Yeah, this is Bob Holly from White Salmon. And I have supported you from the beginning, financially and otherwise. But this is a question neither the Democrats or the Republicans are talking about. And that's our budget deficit.
Oh, yeah.
We're rapidly.
But yeah, I'll restate it.
Neither the Republicans or the Democrats are talking about our budget deficit. We are rapidly coming to $1 trillion deficits as far as the eye can see.
Yeah.
That's not sustainable.
Right.
It's not a crisis yet, but it will become a crisis.
Yeah.
And if we get into a recession, what happened in the last recession? Our budget deficit skyrocketed.
Yeah.
What if interest rates are on the rise?
Yeah.
That will also exacerbate the budget deficits. It'll make it much worse.
Yeah.
Now, the Republicans, all they want to talk about is lowering taxes. But I don't hear much from the Democrats about raising taxes. You get a lot of government services, and I, for one, I appreciate those government services. And I'm willing to pay for those services. But nobody wants to talk about that.
Yeah.
And how would you approach this one?
So the question for Bob was on the federal debt and the deficits that we've had for many years and the accumulation of it, which is a federal debt, and why Republicans talk about cutting programs and Democrats don't talk about raising taxes. Because Democrats want to be elected? I think it's one of the things that they would tell you. I mean, it's either revenue in or it's revenue out. It's pretty simple that way, isn't it? I think the place to begin is to look at that tax reform bill and change some things on that bill. Because as I mentioned earlier, disproportionately, I don't know the stat, I think it's 83% advantages corporations, which didn't need it, and wealthy Americans who've prospered under this economy. So I am absolutely comfortable changing that bill because I want tax cuts, if we do it, to help working families. Because working families need the assistance, corporations don't. They're not putting it back into our economy. They're buying back stocks, and they're helping themselves. And wealthy Americans are doing fine in this economy, not working class Americans. And there's a great statistic that I saw the other day which showed wages from the 70s until today, wage stagnation. It is almost a flat line from the 70s. Americans haven't had real wages. This is what corporate profits look like. And what happened there? The tax bill. So the question I ask, and we should ask all Republicans, is why would you support a bill that helps the people who don't need it, and you want to cut the programs that help the people who do?
And Jamie's very proud of that bill.
She's very proud of it. She's running on that bill. She's running on that bill. And let's let her. Because you know what? The more people know about the bill, the less attractive it becomes for them. Especially when we start talking about cutting programs. So there are parts of it that I like. I mean, there's a part of the bill that creates they were economic like opportunity zones or something, where somebody, to avoid paying capital gains, would reinvest money in rural economies that sort of need on economic development projects. That's a great idea. Why do we have to put that in a bill that helps corporate America that doesn't need it? I don't think it belongs there. So it's fine what we like that helps us, helps our overall economy, and not the stuff that doesn't.
Well, Jamie does have an agreement, a pledge with Grover Northwest
Oh, really?
that she will never increase taxes. And I'm almost every Republican does.
Yeah.
And he keeps them in his safe.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the names of them in the safe?
Yeah, the signed
The signed
pledge.
pledges.
So basically, she gave her power of her constituents
Yeah.
away to Grover Northwest.
That's a problem. That's a problem. Also, taking corporate money. We have to ask, when you get donations from corporations, how does that affect how you vote on healthcare? How does it affect how you vote on gun safety measures?
Pharmaceuticals.
Well, pharmaceutical industry, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't know that, so thank you. Yes.
So I'd like to hear your thoughts on the bridge, the Hood River White Salmon Bridge.
So this came up earlier, and I was all over this 9 months ago when I launched my campaign, because I came to my second town hall, which was in Lisle, and people were out talking about the bridge, and I was like, oh, the I-5 bridge. They're like, no, the one over there. And I was like, is it another issue? So I'm not as up to speed because I knew that there was a private company that was looking into it, and people were dissatisfied with that, and the port was playing a role, and they were dissatisfied with that. I know that the tolls doubled, but that some people who are economically disadvantaged get a pass or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong on all of this. I kind of like how they did that. I mean, you shouldn't double tolls on a bridge like overnight, but the fact that people who are disadvantaged because they were going back and forth, I like sort of that mechanism.
If you have a transponder.
Is that what it is?
Right, local. If you're
local,
local, you have a breeze by.
Yeah, the breeze by,
You pay
yeah.
$1
The
and
bigger
otherwise it's
issue
cheaper.
is it's gonna take a lot of money to
Yeah,
replace
going
it.
back to that.
And where's the money gonna come from and how are you gonna get it?
So I think that, I just want to make sure I knew the issue before I answered, but it's an easy
Fine.
answer. I think federal dollars, whenever you look at federal projects, like bridges, especially.
It's not a federal project because it's owned by the Port of Hood River.
So I don't have an answer for you there. Could it be a public-private partnership? That's where I would go then. Because that provides some federal funding if you partner with somebody. And so I think that in certain types of projects, I like public-private partnerships, so that's what I would advocate for. But I do think federal dollars for interstate bridges
interstate.
makes a lot of stake.
Yeah.
Same thing for I-5. It should be federal dollars. We had an I-5 bridge solution, and it was killed by 2 Republicans at the last minute. We had $660 million of federal dollars for that project. We had money from both states for that project. We had a budget which allowed us to build that bridge, and it got killed, and nothing's happened since. We have my opponent talking about tolls, but she's done nothing to advance that project forward. And it slows the movement of commerce, it slows the movement of people, it harms our environment because people are on that bridge for too long. And we should ask her what she's done since 2010 to solve the major infrastructure project in addition to this bridge. Sorry, don't want to just focus on I-5.
But
Ask what she's done in the last 8 years. That's the
Washington
priority.
State Democrats have come out with a resolution requiring a bi-state bridge commission. And Curtis King, who is was the chair of the state Senate, Senator King,
Yeah.
of the Transportation Committee, is still our representative, our senator in Olympia, and he's committed to a bi-state commission. I
Yeah.
spoke to him yesterday.
So I did some work actually for the city of Portland and Vancouver on bi-state compacts, which is how unless we're talking about 2 different things.
No.
And it was an investigation as to whether or not that was necessary in order to address the I-5 bridge. And I came away with the conclusion that it wasn't necessary, as long as you were able to have effective leadership who's able to reach across the river and work collaboratively towards a solution. I'm not opposed to compacts. I think that we see them in the East for their transit issues, but New York, New Jersey being an example of that. I'm just not certain we need that layer of bureaucracy at this time.
What's the difference between a compact and a commission?
I think we're talking about the same thing. What a bi-state compact or a multi-state compact is when both governors sign on to creating that compact, and the federal government sort of gives it its blessing. So I think it's the same thing. If it's a commission, then you don't need to have that layer of bureaucracy. Maybe it's just having, something like the Columbia River, the CRC, which is what we had before. So I'd have to find out more about King's solution before I can answer that.
You know, the Astoria Bridge was built with federal dollars,
But
a
it's
lot of
a
it.
highway, it's a
Yeah.
federal highway, we don't have a federal
We
highway.
do have a federal highway, 84.
No, the crossing is a federal highway.
Oh, it is.
No, in
Astoria.
Astoria.
Oh, you mean 101?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the problems with our bridge, it's not a federal highway crossing a bridge, it's actually
Oh,
not
okay.
even a state highway at either end.
Yeah.
It's a weird,
It's a
weird
very
situation.
rickety bridge too. In the back.
Great.
Was she first? Okay.
You're a professor, right? So
Yeah.
I have to ask you a book question.
Okay.
Do you, first of all, I wanna know if you read Paul Krugman in the New York Times?
I do.
Okay, and then could you just tell us a little bit about some book or books or something that really have
Oh,
influenced
yes,
you?
yes.
The way you perceive our economic strata and our racial strata in
Yeah.
this country, I mean.
The best book, so I went on a reading tear after 2016, the election of Trump, because I was mad. I'm a political science professor and I got my prediction wrong. And I'm very proud of my batting average. And then secondly, I didn't know what the hell was going on with our country. So the best book that I read, which captures what I think is occurring in rural America and in other parts of the country, which led to the election, is a book by Arlie Hochschild. She's a sociologist, and the book's called Strangers in Their Own Land. I don't remember the subtitle, but it's a fabulous book. She's a fellow academic. She did qualitative research, where she interviewed a lot of people, and it's just, she captures sort of the rage that's out there, which is rooted often in people's economic insecurity. There's also a book called White Working Class by, I think her name is Joan Armstrong. She was a New York Times columnist that I thought was also very, very compelling, talking about how, our working class Americans feel both about those people who aren't, and then those people who are quite successful, and where their rage comes from. So those are two that I would very much recommend. There's been, and if you can't read Arlie's full book, she has an academic article. It's like 7 pages long, which sort of is a nice synopsis. But I would look that up. And then I'm reading right now a book by Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. He's a social psychologist, and it's why the subheading is Why Religion and Politics Divides Us. I don't remember the first part of it. But it's a fabulous book which talks about why we are so polarized and why it's so difficult for people to speak to one another when they have different views. And that's a little bit harder to get through. It's not as fun, but it's a very impactful book. So those would be my recommendations. And then my books. The first one. So I said the woman behind you, and then I'm going to come over here. Love Wins. Oh, you were just flagging her for me. Thank you.
I'm Abby from White Salmon. What would you do to reduce mass incarceration and recidivism?
Well, reduce mass incarceration. Is that the question? Great. Great question. So, the first thing is, our war on drugs has created felons out of a lot of people. So I think we have to look at sort of our laws and, how they're contributing to mass incarceration. Because we find particularly drugs laws disproportionately affect communities of color, and many people have made small mistakes and they have felonies and they can't get back to work and they can't vote in many states. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is that we have to stop incentivizing arresting and locking people up by these private prisons, which I think is creating this, creating that incentive. And so I would work at it from that angle as well. And I don't have a lot of faith in these private prisons either, because I don't think that they're run very effectively. And there shouldn't be that profit motive that's involved. So those are two things that I would look into. And I do think we ought to look at how we are treating our people who are in prisons, so that we could provide them with some sort of path after they get out. Recidivism rates are primarily because people are treated poorly and they're not rehabilitated. So we have to look at what programs we can bring, including education in our prisons, to make sure that they have a path forward once they leave. That will, I think, decrease recidivism rates, and I think it's a humane thing to do as well. So let's think about the old model that we used to have, and not just be so punitive with our laws and with how we treat people behind
This is a very micro question. My name's Ann. I'm from White Salmon. What would you tell somebody who has already supported Jamie because of her support of their businesses, the work she's done to get contracts with the DOD, that kind of thing, that isn't legislative,
Yeah.
but that kind of work?
Well, I would say that every representative who's elected will always do constituency work. That's what representatives do.
Right.
And a lot of that work isn't a partisan issue. You know, you're trying to help somebody who needs help. Every representative will do that, is the first thing that I would mention. The second thing I would mention is they should ask themselves, on the whole, what has this representative done for the last 8 years to help me in my community? Not just on an individual level, but on the big issues, on the issues of taxes, on the issues of affordable health care, on the issue of lowering the cost of prescription drugs. Those are issues that impact everybody in the district. If somebody's been in office for 8 years, you should expect a whole lot from them, not just in how they're voting, but whether or not they're a leader in their party for the issues that matter to constituents. So I would ask them that. So this is a referendum on Jamie Rare Butler. And then I would also ask how they feel about a representative who doesn't meet with constituents, doesn't hold live town halls.
I will be honest, couldn't care less.
You couldn't care less.
Not me, but he couldn't.
Oh, you're talking about somebody in particular.
Yes.
Well, I would say that in this room, people care a whole lot.
Well, I don't doubt that, we're all here.
Yeah. But on issues, sort of, I would focus it on the issues. What is the difference in the positions on these big issues that matter? So tell me why he or she would say she's great. She said small businesses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, do you have any qualms with going after, especially Defense Department, you know, the 3-letter agencies, Homeland Security, those kind of contracts, and helping businesses get those kinds of contracts?
How does she help a business get a contract? So I'm not sure what's.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I just, that's what I
Yeah.
consistently hear, and so if any work that you would do you have any qualms in getting those kinds of, working with those agencies?
I have no qualms working with agencies, no. And I think that as a member of Congress, you not only work with agencies, especially if they fall short, but you have an oversight function to make sure that they're operating appropriately. I think members of Congress, that's part of what our jobs are. And in terms of small businesses, you know, I grew up in a small business, my family had small businesses. One of the things we have to ask ourselves is if our tax code disproportionately helps major corporations who get stronger, what impact is that gonna have on small family businesses? The only time our business almost went out of business when I was growing up was when Fred Meyer came to Brookings, Oregon. And it was the Walmart of the day. We saw many small businesses go under because you had a larger corporation that could buy products a lot less expensively, and people go for the lower prices. So I suffered through that, our family suffered through that, and we were able to keep the business. But you know, when you have people who've got all that power and they continue to get power, small businesses are threatened. So you might want to ask them a little bit about that. But I'll find out about the contract issue, I just don't know it for certain. And I'll take your vote, even if I can't have his. I'll take your vote, even if I can't have his.
Well, we've voted opposite.
Okay, yeah, I'm married to a Republican too,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Cheryl from White Salmon. The thing I wanted to maybe talk about briefly, because we're a very rural community
Yes.
here, and on the east end of our county, there are a majority of Republicans
Mhm.
that vote there. But the issue I wanted to talk about was, one, you said something about taking into consideration of taking large donations from out of the area.
Yeah.
And I did see the interview with you and Jamie, which is on YouTube.
The Guardian?
The Columbian,
Yeah.
Or
and
the
there were
Columbian,
lots of
yeah.
questions. But one of the questions that because I have a family of people who hunt and collect
Mhm.
guns, there's a
Mhm.
lot of guns
Yep.
out there, and there is a very impassioned, the NRA, if you've seen any of their ads, are frightening.
Yeah.
There are some that are literally frightening to the point where they're talking like it's gonna be a civil war, hang on to your guns,
Yeah.
and only vote for those people who support the Second Amendment. And it's a very passionate plea and a very frightening plea.
Mhm.
And I just wondered if you would talk a little bit about your position
Sure.
on that.
Yeah.
And how you might reach out to those people who are really frightened that somebody in the government is going to come and take their guns.
Yeah. So first, let's call out the NRA for its bad behavior, because
Bad behavior.
it has politicized this issue, and it frightens people, because they think the government's gonna come steal their guns. So, that's why I don't take any NRA money. They won't offer it to me anyway. I wouldn't take any money if they did. But they have really skewed the debate so that a small number of very loud people have an outsized voice in the whole conversation about gun safety. So that's a problem. Jamie Herr Butler's taking money from them. I think she's fine with doing so.
And she said so in the interview.
She said so in the interview.
After she danced around the issue forever.
She said she'd take money from anyone. I wouldn't, because I have a problem with them because I think of what I've just mentioned. I believe in the Second Amendment, but like all amendments, there are restrictions on every amendment. And when we talk about what we should do about guns, the first thing I mentioned is we should study gun violence. Now the CDC can do so. There used to be an amendment, the Dickey Amendment, which prohibited the CDC from studying gun violence. We need to study it because I want to be able to study it to craft gun safety measures that will decrease gun violence. So that's the first place that I want to start with. The second is, I think there's wide, going back to what I said earlier about immigration, wide bipartisan support for universal background checks, closing the gun show loopholes. In Washington State, we had 2 initiatives passed which have had a tremendous impact on gun safety. The first, where somebody could be adjudicated mentally ill, they won't have access to firearms. And the second is what we call red flag laws, or where you can get an extreme risk in Washington State. So why we can't have those types of measures at the federal level, I don't understand. So start with where we have wide bipartisan support, and then look at the gun safety measures that we know will save lives. Let's not just look at assault weapons, but the fact that handguns are the ones that are usually leading to all this violence, and that a lot of it is suicides. It's a mental health issue, not just somebody who goes and shoots a lot of people at a gaming show or whatever happened the other day, but people who die by their own hand. And you can only really address it by looking comprehensively at it. So that's sort of where it's a tough issue because it gets so impassioned, and people are very fearful because they've been told to be fearful. Because the NRA has an agenda, which is, of course, to sell some weapons. Don't.
I was just wondering if you could speak to, of course, a role for agencies. What do you think of the management of the federal forests and the Columbia River, the federal power system, and how you would change management of either one of those?
What was the question?
The question was about how I feel about the management of the
Forests and the river.
forest in the river. So I don't know enough about the management to say that I think there's a problem there. I know that the biggest issue that we're facing right now is the renegotiation of the Columbia River Treaty with Canada. I think that's something we have to be mindful about because it impacts power, that also then impacts salmon. And so that's the thing that I focused on mostly when I've talked about these issues. In terms of forest management, I think we had to look at a combination of conservation, but also allowing a certain amount of logging, because that's family wage jobs that still exist in certain rural counties. In terms of the, you said power, so you're talking about the BPA or?
Just talking about, it's the Endangered Species Act,
Yeah.
it's water, it's power,
Yeah.
it's transport.
Yeah, so ESA, I'm very much in favor of it. I think we have to be, it's something that has been able to protect a species and it's important, but I wouldn't want to get away with it. I'm not in favor of some of these regulations that the Trump administration is trying to get rid of that deal with clean water and clean air. I don't think I'm answering this question effectively, and it's bothering me right now. So, can you give me a specific example of something you're unhappy with, so I can see if I can find out where you're coming from?
I work for USGS.
You're doing a great job.
I just do the
Management's fine.
My role, I work in public services.
Yeah.
So my role, especially with the agency I work for, is Congress or the public has a question, you go out, you investigate that question, you give you the facts, you make the policy.
Yeah.
So the things that concern me are wildfires.
Yeah.
And climate change and how we use the river to mitigate for it or to adapt to it, because we're not gonna stop.
Yeah, no, and they're connected, right? I mean, when we talk about climate change, we should be talking about forest fires, we should be talking about crop yields and what's happening with them. We should talk about the fires that affected Oregon and Washington, which sort of ruined people's wheat crops, and it was supposed to be a bumper crop, and so we have farmers who are struggling. But the connection between them is important. And because you're a scientist, you know that science is important. So I think highlighting science and making sure our policy decisions are driven by science rather than politics is the first place to start. Climate change is real, it's human caused, it's the biggest public policy problem facing this country or the planet. We have to start talking now about how we deal with it rather than waiting. There are measures which focus on carbon emissions. There are other things that we can do. You can bury carbon. I'm on the group of scientists who are talking about that, and I thought that's an interesting approach. And so as an academic, as somebody who's a social scientist, not a real one, I believe in science. And they do their job without politics involved. And the fact that many of them are undermined by including this administration, I think is a shame. I'll have a better answer next time. Yes, now you have a question.
I'm Diane from White Salmon, and I have a foreign policy question.
That never comes up.
We do live in a world.
Yes.
What was my question?
About the word war with Canada?
I've got a question. How would you critique the current administration's foreign policy, and would you change it?
Wow. So yes, yes. I mean, look, in a nutshell, Trump cozies up to dictators, and our allies are now our enemies. The fact that he said that Canada was our enemy is a problem to me. The fact that he cozies up to Putin is a problem to all of us. The fact that he works with people who are actively trying to undermine our 2018 election, just like they were actively undermining the 2016 election, should be alarming to all of us. So I would not be meeting with dictators. I would not, meet with people who treat their own people horribly, because I wouldn't want to give them the opportunity to be on the national stage with the greatest country, in the world. And I think I would not do that. I have a problem with that. I have a big problem with how Trump is going about on the issue of trade. I heard today that he's trying to unilaterally get rid of NAFTA. I don't understand that. I don't think he could do that constitutionally because Congress implemented that agreement. So I would move away from this only I alone can do things approach, which is what Donald Trump does. In my opinion, with the complicity of Republicans, including Jamie Butler, he wants to blow things up, but he's got no plans to fix it. Pulls out of the Paris Climate Accord. Sorry, no chance to revisit it, right? He's pulling out, I think, of NAFTA. I don't know what his plans are to replace it, but we haven't seen it. He's getting into trade wars, which is going to have even more serious economic effect. I think that's a foreign policy issue. So I'm not seeing a whole lot that I like. So I would want to do, the main thing I would want to do is to have foreign policy more under the umbrella of Congress rather than a single individual. So historically, the president has had a lead because the president speaks as one, speaks for the country. But I think with this administration, we see what happens when the president is somebody like Donald Trump. And so I would like Congress to reassert its authority in the arena of foreign affairs. They could do it with trade by starting to pass some laws. They could do it by not allowing, if the president passes some of these agreements, making sure there's a path forward. They could do it by fully funding the State Department and making sure the State Department has people in it so you can engage in diplomacy. I mean, there's a whole lot there. And somebody asked me, is there one thing that he's done in the foreign policy arena that you agree with? And I can't find anything. So I change everything and move in an opposite direction.
Not just in Afghanistan, but sitting.
There's like 13 hot spots, is what somebody told me, in Yemen and other areas.
Do we need to do that to police the whole world?
Well, I think we have to have a presence in some of these areas, yes. Whether or not we become the world's policeman, I think, is a different question. And I believe that, we were able to dial things down in Iraq and Afghanistan and to hand things over to those countries. But I wouldn't say that we should never have a presence in a country. It sounds like maybe that might be where you're at right now. It's certainly something that some people talk about, but I'd like to look at each one sort of separately.
You get rid of the the Defense Authorization Act that we've been working on since September 11th, that the current administration is using as an excuse to go to all these places.
I'll have to look into that because I don't know enough. So
I'll talk you about that.
In the back, and then I'm gonna come around this way. Jennifer.
What do you see as the hot issues with the Columbia Gorge scenic area?
Well, preserving it, number one.
So that's what I
yeah.
want to talk about,
Yeah.
what you see as the major issues right now around it, and what you know about it.
Not as much, not enough to give you a fully formed answer on it. I know members of the board, Don Bonker's on it. I know somebody else who's on the board who we are meeting with in a couple of weeks. I know a new member of the board, and so I'd want to learn a little bit more. What do you see as the biggest issue?
Endless, well, I mean, I'm not expert on this, but.
But as a constituent of the area?
Endless pressures to develop.
Yeah.
There's always the desire to bring in money and make money, and I get that, but.
Talking about housing, you're talking about,
Housing, business, like pushing it in all sorts of ways, and it doesn't take much to lose what's precious.
do you think the Gorge Commission's doing a good job in making sure that that doesn't happen?
I don't have like an informed opinion about that, I can just say that I've heard they just really haven't been funded or empowered the way they need to be.
Okay.
And so their hands are tied, so we actually need that structure to be more
Right.
empowered, is my bet.
Well, I mean, funding is something that's an easy lift. I like the fact that there is a commission, and that people are appointed to it by the governors, I think, is that?
Governors and counties.
Yeah, so, you know, I like that form of a commission. You're talking about commissions. I mean, that's an example of a commission. But if it's a funding issue, that's easily solved. I mean, it's a great resource for our communities, and we want to encourage its preservation for tourism, which is a large part of what helps keep these communities alive.
My
But
understanding is the funding issue isn't an easy issue to solve, and
Okay.
it has to do with two states.
Yeah, it's a bi-state
And so
compact.
it's like, its hands are tied in a lot of different ways.
yeah, you're right. That's an example of bi-state compact. I forgot about that one. So I'll try to learn more. So I have an answer next time I see you.
Clear cutting in the gorge.
They're clear cutting in the gorge.
The current regulations apparently do allow it. I don't know the details, but that would be high on my list.
Logging is allowed under the Scenic Area Act, as long as it's the privately owned lands, and as long as they follow the state forestry best practices.
They're managed in
it's
the
allowed.
forest.
But that's the person to talk to, by the
I
way.
think that having a representative on board who knows what's happening is important, and I think
Yeah.
it's a very tense political issue, because it has to do with livelihoods, and it has
Yeah.
to do with everyone's vision of their own happiness, which then comes in conflict with other people's happiness.
Absolutely, yeah.
And someone who can like rock the big thing, I think would be really important.
Yeah, and that's not unique. A lot of these policy issues, we talked about health a lot today. You know, there are tensions between different groups. So, it missed a few people, and so I'm sorry. So but people who haven't asked a question first, and then I'll circle back. Okay, and then you're next. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna ask you a question that's kind of preparing you for when you debate Jamie.
Uh-huh.
Because I know she's probably gonna bring it up. How do you feel about impeaching President Trump?
Yeah, so that comes up a lot. I believe that the Mueller investigation has to continue. If it doesn't, and we try to act prematurely to impeach Trump, it's gonna be an even bigger disaster than if we do it after the investigation. So I think that we should wait for it, and we should make sure we preserve the investigation as much as possible. And I'm always terrified when I see Trump tweeting Jeff Sessions or Rosenstein, because if he starts to go down that route, which is to try to get people fired so that the investigation won't continue, that's alarming. I think he's already done enough to, I think, obstruct. I mean, well, what he does in public and talking about pardons of people and things like that, I think is an intentional effort to obstruct justice. But I'd rather put it in the hands of Mueller, who I think has done a very good job in the investigation and keeping a tight lid on the investigation, which is what is necessary for, to get the results. And I don't know when it's gonna happen. That's the other thing, is either it's gonna happen very, very soon, in the next couple weeks, or he's gonna have to make a decision about before or after the election, and that's tough, that he has to think politically. But if the evidence is there, I would vote to impeach. I've said I want to be on the Judiciary Committee because of my own academic background in public law. But I hope the evidence is overwhelming. Because if it isn't overwhelming, it's gonna really hurt our country, and it's gonna further the divide. And I don't think we have the leadership right now in institutions of government to get us past that divide. And do you remember the Bill Clinton impeachment? I do. It wasn't a good time in our history. And it wasn't handled well in the aftermath. And so I think we have to be very careful, if it happens, or even if it doesn't happen, that we have leaders who will try to bring people together rather than demonizing each other, which is what we've historically done.
Your conversation with Diane, my name's Chris.
Chris.
From White Salmon. Your conversation with Diane about international.
Yeah.
And the fact we have troops in so many different countries reminds me of a real sensitive point on my part. I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I got to find out how poorly military works at solving political and social problems. And it makes me wonder why we don't hear, well, I mean, I grew up in the 60s. What happened to the Peace Corps? What happened to we have a confused State Department, we have our military. What else, what other tools do we have to contend with our relationship with other countries, particularly the ones that are having problems?
Well, hopefully diplomacy. I mean, I think that if we have a really good State Department.
Do we have that in our State Department right now?
No, we don't. In fact, the number of unfilled positions in the State Department is astonishing, apparently. People aren't being nominated, they're not hiring, and I think that's intentionally done to strip the State Department of its power. So I don't know how you fix that. You've got to get, please fund them, or please hire people. I don't know what to do.
That seems to be a relationship at the upper ends of the political structure. But what about grassroots? Do you have any ideas on how to connect up with other people? Right now we're hoping to host an exchange student from Colombia. Okay, we don't hear much about exchange programs. We don't hear much about Peace Corps. We don't hear much about how we can assist other people unless we do it through a church.
Right.
A GM, non-governmental.
NGO, yeah.
ONG.
I'm trying to think about my understanding of sort of funding for those things, because I don't know if the funding for the Peace Corps has gone down or not. I don't know enough about where the holes are. I think part of it is letting people know that there are resources out there if they want them. I am afraid I don't know enough to talk about that. And if somebody else knows, yes.
I'm a return Peace Corps volunteer from years ago, and I get the email messages, so the Peace Corps funding is down
Oh, it
from
is, okay.
previous years, but they have appointed a new director. It's a political appointment who's the head of the Peace Corps. And that position was finally filled. In fact, a year ago, last summer, I met with the acting director of the Peace Corps, and she said the program was still strong under the new administration, but it was a little, touch and go. But the program is still alive and well and serving 100+ countries throughout the world.
Oh, super.
Thank you, Karen.
Sure.
And I was a Fulbrighter, and I saw that their funding for that, which is exchange program for faculty and professionals, had gone down. So I know just little bits and pieces. But I'm going to pivot. I'm learning to pivot. This is wonderful. Pivot a little bit, because one of the things, and we lost some young people, so they probably didn't like my answers. But I still have Abby. One of the things that youth and young adults are criticized for is their lack of engagement in politics. Certainly they vote at lower levels than do people who look like me and some people in this room. But they are actually very active civically in other ways. A lot of it is through nonprofits or issue campaigns. Some is their churches. So I think that the reason why I like things like the Peace Corps and my Fulbright and Half Bright, which is for college students to do exchanges, is it allows that engagement in a way that's not political. So I think we should encourage youth to be involved in things like that, because it opens, first of all, especially anything international, just opens up their eyes to possibility, but allows them to have that connection to community, connection to what government could do, and wonderful experiences. I think we should really champion that as much as possible. And then also people like you, if you're taking an exchange student, and sort of encourage that, and let people know that you've done it already or you are going to.
We have done it in the past, and we are continuing to participate.
Sort of telling people about your story, the fact that you did it and you're continuing to do it because you enjoyed it and all that. I think that a lot of people aren't aware of many of these programs. Yes, sir.
Richard, White Salmon. So, is there some way we can protect ourselves from news organizations if, just false information? It's blatantly false.
Yeah.
And the, FCC, there are some ways that you're legal.
Yeah.
Is what you expect.
So the question is whether or not we can essentially protect ourselves from fake news, right?
Fox News.
That would have been a fun subliminal thing that I could have done, would have been clever. Not really. I mean, I don't think you want to engage in government censorship, which would be one answer. You know, you don't want government to police the news. What I think you have to do is teach people from an early age how to be active and smart consumers of the news.
So even though they say something that is, they have no proof of or no information to back it up, just like good journalism practices.
Yeah.
Doesn't the FCC give licenses to people?
So, okay, yeah, can we yank the license of a broadcast organization like Fox News if we think that they're just perpetuating lies? Probably. Should we? I don't know if that's the right answer. I think that there are things, I still believe we have to learn to be active consumers of the news, but, you know, censorship is it's a delicate issue, and I think it's a constitutional issue as well. I do believe calling out news organizations for fake news is what we have to do as citizens. There are great sites there like Snopes where you can sort of fact check all these crazy things that we hear. One possibility that I'm toying with is the role of social media platform organizations and what they do in terms of how they prioritize what you're viewing, and whether or not there's something there that we can encourage them to do. So that's a possibility. But other than that, I think we have to be very careful here, and just make sure that we call it out as you know, when it's untrue. So you mentioned the Colombian interview with Jamie Hart Butler. One of the things that I said is I don't take corporate money, and she said I don't take corporate money either. It's illegal. She does take corporate PAC money, but I didn't say corporate PAC money, so she was able to sort of do that. So I think we have to sort of just be careful in calling people out and holding them to account, and that's our responsibility as citizens. Do you have suggestions besides the FEC license?
Well, I know other countries have, I'm aware that they have laws against news that's not true.
Well, they have, in other countries have stronger laws against libel and slander, and it's easier to prevail. Whereas in the United States, we have very weak laws, because you have to show sort of malice, and very infrequently are people successful, because you also have to show harm. So that could be a route. I'm not sure I'm there yet, though. It's tricky. It's a hard one. Please.
I'm Tom. I'm from Bingen, and I'm curious what your thoughts are at first blush on retention of the leadership should this blue wave come to fruition.
Yeah. So it's a great question, Tom, and I'm getting it a lot. So I believe that
I just say before you answer that I'm a fan of Nancy Pelosi because she's held her caucus together through some trying times, and I think instituting some new leadership this time would be a mistake. So.
Yeah, she's a very powerful leader. She raises a lot of money for the party, but she's also a polarizing leader to many.
Sounds like we're not used to that.
No. However, we might have an opportunity. I believe it is time for new leadership. What I would like to see happen, though, is to have people like Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer, who are, you know, great leaders for the party, do an effective job mentoring a new crop of leaders for Congress. Because the problem with very new leadership, as you're suggesting, is you sort of lose that expertise. You lose the ability, you know, to hold the caucus together. But at the same time, you need to always be developing talent. And I don't think that party leadership has done a good job developing that talent.
Well, you're here.
Yeah, well, I'll be fresh. I'll be speaker. Yay. But I think we have to do that. But the other thing that I've been mentioning a lot is I think we have a really good opportunity in 2018 with what I think will be a large number of newly elected members to sort of change the way we look at leadership and who we select. Because what often happens is as a newly elected member of Congress, the leadership goes after you to secure your vote right away. You're sort of beholden to them, particularly if they're raising money on your behalf. And so I think we, as newly elected members, have to try to avoid that trap so we can be independent-minded. Because leadership is part of the problem with the polarization of our institution. They want those party line votes, and it makes it very difficult for representatives like me who are serving a very diverse district where there are tensions that I have that you don't have in liberal California. And if leadership doesn't recognize that and allow you to be an independent thinker, then I'm not serving my constituency well. So the leaders I'll select will be the ones that will allow me to maintain my independence to serve the people of Southwest Washington. So, but it comes up a lot, Tom. a lot of people are asking about it, and I will be painted as a Nancy Pelosi liberal. I already am, so you know, fake news, right? But it's going to happen regardless. Yeah.
I look around the room and I see all these young faces. The average age in here is 23. What can we do, and what could you do to reduce the age limit of some of your town halls? What might you be able to do?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially when I saw 3 youngsters leave. And I was like, somebody go find them, get them back here.
Don't worry, we know them, they just have to get up really
Okay, good. Tell them I was very concerned. What did I say? I knew I blew that question with Dayton, and I'm not happy with my Columbia Gorge answer, and so. First of all, let's give the youth a little bit of a pass, and this might not be popular. But if you are a millennial, and I guess it goes up to age 36 now, so I don't know what's up with that. But if you're young in America today, you have not lived through a working democracy. You haven't. You lived through Bush v. Gore, 2 elections where a popular vote winner didn't win the presidency, the corrosive role of money in politics, where corporations seem to be buying off members of Congress. And youngsters are really pissed off about that. And they want to get money out of politics, and they want government that listens to them and they don't feel heard. So I think we ought to recognize why they're not participating. And the fact that when they do participate, it's usually been to follow somebody like Barack Obama or Bernie Sanders, which I don't think is right. I think you should follow an issue. You know, following a person, they're temporary, because when they're gone, you know, what happens to that person? We have to just tell them that we're here to listen to them, and we have to get them inspired, and we have to get them in the room, because that's the other thing. If I think people come to town halls, if they're like Abby, you know, and they're interested in politics, and they find a leader who says, I'm not taking corporate money, or they find somebody who says, I really want to work to solve problems and not be wedded to a political ideology, I think that might get them a little bit more interested in politics. But I do think we have to recognize why they are consciously opting out, and also recognize that they are participating in different ways. We just don't see it. It's just we often look at voting as the metric for civic engagement. It's only one of many things that you do. So, but yeah, I want them here. So if you know them, can you tell them to come visit? Because I'm here all the time. And I think it's important because we need to have them involved early, because as we all know, which is why we're here today, if you're involved in politics early, you continue that involvement throughout your adult life. And so there are very few people who enter into political participation at age 40 or 50. If you're 40 or 50 and you're active, you've been active all your life. So that's why it's alarming that they're not participating as much as we'd like them to. I think, going back to the gun issue, Cheryl? Seeing how the youth got activated on the issue of gun safety after Parkland really warmed my small d Democratic heart, my big D Democratic heart. Because they were active around an issue rather than an individual, and I think that will have staying power because they're also making a difference in the debate. And so what they also have to see is that their participation will matter, and that sort of is what gets them involved. So, I mean, we've held town halls at college campuses, and you know, we do outreach, but it's hard. Not perfect tonight, but I'm here to get better. If you're a supporter, I hope I haven't lost you. And I appreciate your support. If you like what you hear and see, Kirsten will tackle you on your way out. We have an office that we're opening up. Did you want to mention something about that, Kirsten?
Yeah, down in Vinton, we are opening up a county campaign headquarters, not only for Carolyn but also for Sasha Netley, who's running for state representative position 1. So we will have some opportunities for volunteers to come down during office hours, and we'll train you how to do phone banking, and we'll be doing some canvases out of that office. Hopefully we'll get more signs, and buttons and campaign swag, and we'll have all of that. So if you are, if you want to sign up to be on my email list, which is my Quick County volunteer for Carolyn Long and Sasha Bentley and Sasha River campaign as well, make sure you leave your email here with us, and I will let you know what's next.
So it's a good segue for me, which is that the way we win this race is on the ground. We knocked on 24,000 doors. We had 20,000 text messages. Oh, I get this wrong. And then 34,000 calls. The 24,000 doors knocked, 20,000 text messages. That's why we're able to do so well in the primates, thanks to volunteers like Kirsten and others in this room, by getting people out and energized about this race. So I hope that you will join. I hope I haven't lost anyone. You're gonna circle back with your friends, right? But thank you for coming. I'll be here again. So I hope to see you, and if not, I'll see you on the trail. Thank you.